Try again.
Well, all right, all right. There you are, and here I am. And it is Thursday, June 6th, and this is the 90. Wait, hold up. My math almost failed me. The 98th episode of Storytime with Julian. We are coming up close on the 100th episode before we take our break. And I'm so glad to have you here. Let me go ahead and take the cover all away. And look at us. There we are. Hi. It's good to see you. Look, hey, how are you? Anyway, let's see who we've got in the house, shall we? I see that we've got Angel Monique and Kamisha Umstead. I see that we've got Olivin Boo. I see we've got Issa Marie. It's good to see you back, Issa Marie. I see Erica Yolita is with us again. Erica Goodman over on the YouTubes. I see Angela Rains is with us, and Kitty Foxy is here. And Latricia wants to know. Oh, and we've got Emo here. What's happening, Emo? I see Judy Lee and Kelly Ruff. Okay, I see. I like when y'all come through and let me know that you're here and just shout out and say hello. Makes me feel good, and it lets the other folks in the who are participating know who's in the house, because y'all have your own little side conversation, your whole own whole little world of sidebars, and I love it. I see Brenda Carroll Jackson Harvey is here, and Latricia wanted to know, when can we get a download of that music? That music is available right now on SoundCloud. If you look for Arbatu, who is the artist, the lo-fi DJ and producer who is responsible for creating that music, you will be able to find him on SoundCloud, and I believe you can download each of those tracks individually. That particular mix, that particular blend of those tracks, that's something that I put together just for this intro. So I don't know. I would have to talk to Arbatu and see if he's okay with releasing that particular edit and cut of his work. We are also working on a Storytime with Julian playlist of original music and sounds, so you'll be able to find that on Spotify real soon, sometime between now and the return. I'll let you guys know when it's available, but you'll be able to find a number of little tricks and fun things on Spotify coming up real soon. So yeah, don't distress. It'll be there for you. I see my homie, my partner in hosting, Stephen Boyce, is here in the house with us. Good to see Stephen here. Also, listen, if you don't know, this is called Storytime with Julian. But for those of you who all don't know, I do another program with Stephen, and it is called This is called the show. And we do that show every Monday evening at this same time, at 10 p.m. on Monday evenings. We chop it up and talk about issues facing the Black community. The first of which is the definition of and the shape of the Black community, and everything is within the context of healing the Black community, and particularly that healing coming from within, not just from within the community, but starting within ourselves and then working outward. If you're doing the work within yourself to heal, then what you're going to be putting forth in the world is a healing energy, right? So part of that requires recognizing and acknowledging and discovering those things which are toxic, again, both inwardly within yourself, but also within the community of which you or within which you are a part. So this is called the show, Monday nights at 10 p.m. And even when Storytime is on break, I will still be hosting that with my friend and brother Steven. Y'all need to check that out. Go to the page, like it, find us on the YouTubes, subscribe, and of course my cam would freeze right there at like the most doofy looking expression. That's fine. That's whatever. Go ahead and wait for the camera to reset. I know you guys can still hear me. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and do this until the camera gets reset properly, because I don't want to look goofy. Not sure exactly what happened there, but I don't like it. Anyhow, y'all, and listen, if it has to be like this for the rest of the show, this might just have to be how it is, because I'm not sure what the issue is with the connection. Give me just 1 second, y'all. Huh. All right, that's weird. That's super weird. Um, it looks like we're reconnected. I'm going to try and restart the cam now, and there we go. Okay, that was unpleasant. I'm sorry. Technical glitches is one of the things about doing a live show, is you're going to get some of those, and to be perfectly honest, that's one of the reasons why I'm looking at changing the shape of the show. For those of you all who are around for Shapeshifters, you catch what I'm saying. Anyway, moving forward real good. I see. Let's see. Okay. Foxy Kitty says to make sure I include those dope French songs. Yeah, I will almost certainly put that on the playlist for sure. But here's what we've got tonight. We're coming out of this book here. This is Ghost Summer by A Storytime with Julian Fave, Tananarive Due. Now, some of you all who might remember we first started, the first story that we read from Tananarive Due was out of Gumbo. Y'all remember when like most of our stories came out of Gumbo because it was a big, thick anthology of just super black stories. And quite honestly, I probably could have just made the first 100 episodes of Storytime with Julian coming out of Gumbo. But out of Gumbo, we found a story called, I believe the story was called The Knowing. And it was a story about a woman who knew she had a gift for knowing when people were going to die. And that gift in and of itself, while the story wasn't presented in a horror way, the gift was a kind of an unsettling gift that could make it really difficult for the people in her life, the people who were in her life. And it was such a fascinating story and a gripping story. And I think for a lot of us, it was like, ooh, we need more of this Tananarive Due. And so um, she has shown up in a few of the different anthologies that we've purchased. And whenever there's a Tananarive Due story, we tend to read. As a matter of fact, I believe the last story that we read from Tales of Wakanda was a Tananarive Due story. And so as we are coming sort of to the close of this particular season for Storytime with Julian, I like to revisit some of the writers that we know and love. And of course, I wanted to make sure to pick up Tananarive Due. We've got some Nalo Hopkins that I'm gonna try. I'm gonna see if we can sneak her in too. But tonight's story out of Ghost Summer's story is called Trial Day. I did my thing. I did my little, kind of skim through to see how I felt about it, and I feel pretty good about it. I'm noticing the attendance is a little light tonight. Now, I don't generally complain about the attendance, but it's a little light tonight. I know it's summertime. Y'all done got vaxxed. Some of y'all are vaxxed and waxed, and you're out there having your hot girl summer. I get it. Y'all ain't got time to be sitting at home listening to somebody read you stories when you can get those you can get those later on. But if you would tag a friend, share this stream on your Facebook page, let some people know this is going on so that we can kind of spread the word and get some more people involved, I would much appreciate it. But without any more prelude, without any further Tananarive Due, we're going to start in with Trial Day. Letitia was a few months shy of 10 the summer Brother was scheduled to stand trial. Brother was only her half-brother, and his name was Wallace Lee, but Letitia had always called him Brother because, to her, the warmth and strength of that word suited him best. In turn, he'd always called her Letty, the sassier nickname she preferred, instead of the prissier and cumbersome Letitia. Letitia. Oh, why I'm doing that Daddy and her stepmother insisted on calling her by. Her stepmother thought nicknames were low class, and Daddy usually went by whatever stepmother said, so Brother called her Letty in secret. Brother lived with his mama in Live Oak, which was a day's drive south in Daddy's shiny new 1927 Rickenbacker, farther than most people she knew had traveled in their lives, so she didn't see him as often as she wanted to. During the summers and sometimes for Thanksgiving, Brother took a train to stay with them for as long as 2 weeks, arranging his long limbs into knots so he could sleep on the living room couch. Brother was only 15 now, but he'd always been tall. Letitia had never met Brother's mother, but Daddy was tall enough for two. Letitia and Brother had different mamas in different towns, although Daddy had never been married to either woman, and her stepmother told Letitia that hold on a second, pause. Yeah, I'm going with Letitia. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going with Letitia. And her stepmother told Letitia the whole thing was a disgrace and ought to be a source of personal shame to her, as if Letitia could be responsible for any of the doings in the world before she was born. By studying Brother, Letitia decided that his mama must be dark-skinned like her own, and probably pretty too, judging by Brother's long, thick eyelashes. When he visited them last summer, Brother had been nearly as tall as Daddy, and his voice had dropped to a lower register. Letitia had listened to the two of them laughing on the front porch late at night, having a conversation she wasn't allowed to listen to, and they had sounded to Letitia like two grown men having a gay old time, not a father and son. She still remembered the way they'd laughed, barking out into the night wind. Listening to that sound which seemed to surround the house, Letitia had fallen asleep with a smile, rocking in their happy noise. Even her stepmother, Bernadette, stayed out of the way when Brother was here. Bernadette didn't talk to Brother with her voice shrilled high like the way she talked to Daddy, and sometimes Brother could make her laugh, too. When he did, she'd hide her mouth behind a napkin or hand as if she didn't want anyone to witness a smile on her face. Most times, no one did. Bernadette's smiles were hard to come by and always accidental. Letitia had long ago given up trying to think of ways to bring out Bernadette's smiles, but Brother could. Laughter and smiles of any kind were hard to come by during Brother's impossibly long absences, when Letitia began to wonder if she would see him again or if she just dreamed him. Of all the reasons Letitia had to love him, and his kindness toward her was unlike anyone else's except her father's and poor mama's, perhaps she loved Brother most for bringing the laughter and smiles. So it came as a shock to Letitia when she learned that Brother was in jail. Bernadette told as if she was discussing a stranger she'd read about in the newspaper. Got himself thrown in jail for armed robbery. That's what these young boys get for being so wild. They'll probably give that foolish boy the chair, robbing a white man like that, she told Letitia. Your daddy took up with every tramp and hoodoo woman who looked his way. So what else can he expect? Letitia was too scared for Brother to be angry about Bernadette's insults. She knew what the chair was. The chair was the electric chair at Rayford State Prison, where colored men were sent to grow old or to die if they were destined to take their seat on the chair. As much as Letitia had heard about Rayford and the chair in her tender 9 years of life, she had never imagined she would know someone who got sent there. Those were the hard luck stories from people with hard luck lives. Daddy was Richard Reeves. He had his own grocery store and a cotton farm. He had a house with 2 stories and 3 bedrooms on a 30-acre parcel of land that had once been owned by slaveholders. Daddy and Cecil Johnson, who owned the colored mortuary, were the 2 most envied men in the county. And Daddy was the most envied of the 2 because Bernadette was so much more light-skinned than Mr. Johnson's wife. Daddy and Bernadette looked like twins with their straight hair and honey skin. When Daddy installed the new upstairs bathroom, neighbors flocked to the house because they were still using outhouses, and they wanted to see with their own eyes how a colored man right here on Percival Street had a working toilet and bathtub upstairs in his house, in addition to the one downstairs. Letitia's daddy did not have hard luck, so Brother could not have been sent to Rayford. That's just a misunderstanding, and it's being worked out. I'm sure Wallace Lee's home by now, Daddy said when she asked him, mussing her hair. But he never looked her in the eye when he said it. And Letitia felt a growing, heavy pool of disdain in her belly when it occurred to her that Daddy was lying to her. She had never thought of her father as the kind of man who would lie to a stranger, much less to his daughter, to her. That summer, suddenly, everything in Letitia's world began to feel all wrong. Hearing about Brother's arrest was the first thing. Hearing the lie in Daddy's voice had been the next. But the hardest, the worst, was yet to come. Letitia just knew it. Letitia knew many things, mostly things she wished she didn't. Her teacher called her unusually perceptive, which sounded like a grand thing, but Bernadette instead accused Letitia of mischief and lies, helpless to find anything but wickedness in her. Despite Letitia's efforts to behave as well as she could at all times, to make her presence less burdensome, she knew that Bernadette considered her the very living image of everything wrong with her life. Letitia had known this about Bernadette when she was as young as 5, the first time Daddy brought her to live with him because Mama was too poor. Bernadette hated her right away at first glance. Letitia had not known exactly why, but the hatred had been as plain as the moon in the sky. In later years, Letitia had come to realize that Bernadette hated her because she was proof that Daddy had known other women before her, and because she hated mothering a strange woman's daughter when she could not have children herself. But knowing why hadn't made Letitia feel any more welcome in her father's house. She only felt welcome when Daddy came home at night, when Bernadette locked most of her hatred for Letitia away and concentrated on finding things to dislike about Daddy. Letitia was afraid to enjoy anything about her father's beautiful house because none of it was really hers. She could be sent away at any time and she would hardly ever see Daddy if that happened, like it was before. When Letitia brought powders from Mama to slip into Bernadette's bathwater, she only wanted her stepmother to stop hating so much. Bernadette never said these things like aloud like an evil stepmother in a fairy tale, but she didn't have to. Letitia knew words were only part of who people were, and usually the least important part. Sometimes she felt she could just see through people, as if they were standing before her naked. She could see into people's hearts. At church, people who were stealing from their bosses, cruel to their children, or wooing someone other than the person they were married to avoided locking eyes with Letitia, for fear she might tell on them. When she was younger, she'd blurted out things that made adults gasp, and once a minister had plain slapped her face from the shock of hearing his business told. Now, she'd learned to keep quiet. Letitia's aunties and neighbors near Mama's house had theories about why Letitia had her gift. It was said that she had been born with a caul covering her face, which gave her the seeing eye, the third eye. Others thought it was because Mama was a roots woman and had tied a piece of High John the Conqueror root around Letitia's neck the moment she was born. She knew things, and usually knowing brought her only disappointment and trouble, so speculating over the reasons why brought her no joy. And there would be no joy for some time. That much she knew too. This problem with brother was going to change everything. The problem with brother was going to make every other problem seem small from now on. The problem with brother would be up to her to fix in the end. One afternoon when Daddy was at his store and Bernadette was taking a nap because she'd overheated herself working in her garden, Letitia went out to the corner of the parlor Daddy used as his office with his oak roll-top desk and electric lamp and stacks of papers in different piles. Letitia climbed up into Daddy's leather chair and surveyed the desk. Before she could decide exactly what she was looking for or where to begin, the return address typed on a piece of mail caught her eye. Live Oak, it said. The letter had been opened with the letter opener's neat incision across the top. Letitia brought it out to read by the sunlight stealing in beneath the drawn shade. The whole letter was typed, which told Letitia it must be important. Dear Mr. Reeves, regarding the matter of Wallace Lee Hutchins, I cannot impress upon you enough how urgent it is that you appear at the county courthouse at 1 p.m., Friday, July 20. Many cases like this one are disposed of in the blink of any eye to the defendant's disadvantage. As an attorney for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, I am investigating the rising number of very troubling capital cases in this county. Your son's case is one of an alarming pattern. Please allow me to be frank. 2 eyewitnesses, including the shopkeeper, have told police they saw 2 boys with a .22 caliber pistol at the time of the robbery. The witnesses and the defendants have quarreled in the past, so one party's word goes against the other's, but since the witnesses are white, I don't have to tell you which version will have more credibility. Mrs. Kelly is fighting the charges against her son with all her soul. She was the one who contacted the NAACP. But I'm afraid she is in a similar position as to your own son's mother. Both ladies are ill-respected in this community. Again, Mr. Reeves, it is vital that you contact me as soon as possible to help me prepare your son's defense. My resources in this matter are limited, but I believe that if the jury heard the testimony of a respected colored business owner in his son's defense, we may get a lesser sentence. You are his best chance. My great fear, sir, is that the prosecutor will seek execution. 2 young men were executed earlier this year after being tried in a very similar circumstance where a robbery was committed, but there were no injuries or fatalities. Armed robbery, it seems, is a capital offense for colored boys. Plainly put, I am asking you to help me save your son's life. I think we can both agree that if these 2 young men committed an armed robbery, and although they both maintain their innocence, it's very possible that they did, they deserve a severe punishment in the eyes of the law. They will go to jail for a long time, as is only proper. But these are 16-year-old boys, and neither deserves to die for the ignorant work of one night, especially not under a legal system that is a sham in a country where hunting colored men is virtually legal. There was a lynching not a mile from where I'm lodging the night I arrived, my first exposure to the heinous phenomenon. But it is your son's case that has been sent to the top of the docket. Please help me in this matter. I'm trying to prevent another lynching, this one in a courtroom. The letter was the most important thing Letitia had ever found. It seemed to howl in her hands. She held it so tightly she was afraid she might rip the neat paper and clean in two, reading it and rereading it until she'd memorized the words that mattered. She knew she would want to draw upon the memory of this letter for a long time to come, because there was so much to think about, so much to ponder. She wanted to steal the letter and lie about its disappearance, but she couldn't steal from Daddy. Letitia understood it all now. Brother and a friend had been charged with robbing a store with a gun. The shopkeeper and another witness who didn't like Brother claimed Brother and his friend had a gun, and it was Brother's word against theirs. The court was rushing to take the case to trial and would probably ask for the chair. A lot of colored people have been getting the chair lately, and the problem is so bad that a National Association for Colored People came to see about it. And if Daddy didn't go, Brother might die. It was all so plain to Letitia. It was as if she'd known the whole story the first time Bernadette mentioned that Brother was in jail. The letter said the trial was going to start on July 20. Letitia hadn't thought about what day of the month it was because there was no reason to track time in the summers. But she checked the kitchen wall calendar and learned it was Tuesday, July 17. Brother's trial was in less than 3 days. "You going, aren't you, Daddy?" Letitia said at dinner when she finally dared. Bernadette looked angry before she knew if she should be. "Going where?" she asked in a suspicious tone. She expected to find wrong everywhere. "What are you talking about?" Daddy's face became stone. He looked at Letitia quickly, then his eyes passed over to Bernadette's. "She ain't talking about nothing," Daddy said. "Aren't you going to Brother's trial?" Letitia said. When she said the word trial, Daddy's shoulders hunched as if a huge weight had suddenly been hoisted upon them. "Richard Washington Reeves," her stepmother said. Her voice whispered, but her face was shouting, changing colors in the queer way it often did. "Now come on, Bernadette," Daddy said, pushing himself away from the table. He stared at the floor. "Don't start up again. We're sitting to a pleasant meal." "We settled that, Richard. You promised." Her voice was creeping toward a shout now. "Yes, we settled it," Daddy said. "Of course we did. Pay Letitia no mind." "But you are going, aren't you, Daddy? If you don't, Brother could die." Daddy started cursing under his breath then, something he rarely did. He stood up from the table quickly, throwing his napkin onto his plate. Then he took Letitia's arm in a way that felt nearly rough, bringing her to her feet. "That's enough, Letitia," he said, thundering. Letitia's heart seemed to rock backward, then fall still. "You come with me right now." Letitia was nearly in tears by the time Daddy took her to her room and closed the door behind them. Daddy had only beaten her with his belt once before, when she'd sassed at Bernadette, and she'd cried for 2 days straight. Letitia couldn't imagine she'd earned another whipping for just asking about Brother. Midnight, Letitia's stocky black cat mewed softly from the bed, and the sight of his curious green eyes comforted her. On days like this one, Midnight was her only friend. He rarely left her room the whole day long. "Have you been into my mail?" "Yes, sir," Letitia said, "but I only wanted to know about Brother." "Well, I'm very sorry you did that, Letitia, because that letter was not for your eyes. That letter was from a lawyer from New York who's just trying to scare us, so we'll do what he says. He hasn't lived down here, and he doesn't understand my position. He's asking me to do something I can't do, and I want you to put it out of your head. Your brother got himself into some trouble, so he'll probably go to jail. But I sent some money, and he'll be just fine." Letitia did not remember any part of the letter that said Daddy should send money. "Daddy, he says you have to go or Brother will get the chair." Letitia's father was perspiring now, and Letitia didn't think it was just because of the upper floor was stifling and after so many daylight hours of rising heat beneath the angry summer sun. Daddy looked nervous. No, not nervous. He looked scared. The way he looked when he brought his hunting rifle out of the closet because a strange car was driving slowly past their house at night. Some people were just jealous of him, he said. Some white people. And jealousy was apparently something to fear. There was a bead of sweat on the bulb at the end of his nose, and he could barely make himself keep his brown eyes fixed on hers. You're too young to take this all in, Letitia, Daddy said, his voice sad and gentle. You can't believe everything somebody says just because it's typed on a piece of paper. That lawyer's job is to help your brother, but I'm not a lawyer, and I'm no help to him. And besides that, there's no chance they'll give Wallace Lee the chair. He didn't kill nobody. The leather said. He shook her, just enough to make his words sink in. What did I just tell you about believing everything that's typed on a piece of paper? That's a spook story he wrote in that letter. That's so I'll do what he says. But why won't you, Daddy? You have a car, you could drive there. Daddy sighed, and his breath smelled like pipe tobacco. Nothing's that simple, little princess. Wallace Lee's mother and me knew each other a long time ago. She just shamed herself in that town in ways that have nothing to do with me. And if I get all tangled in this mess, running off to a courtroom where there's newspaper reporters and such, then I'll be shamed too. A businessman can't afford to be shamed. All a colored man has in this world is his name, Letitia. And besides that, there's no use me going to try to stir up trouble. The Klan runs that county, and there's Klan in this county too. People in a place to make life very hard for all of us. Now, my heart aches for Wallace Lee, but I've seen how such things come out in the end, and it won't do any good for any of us. I would just make the situation worse. Far worse. For the first time, Letitia realized that Daddy had a whole list of reasons why he was not going to Live Oak to save brother, one having little to do with another. As she stared up at him in that instant, he shrank in her eyes. Although he was still 3 feet taller with thick arms and thighs as solid as the trunk of an oak, he began to look very small. The way he looked to her when Bernadette chased him from one corner of the house to the other with her sharp tongue, his shoulders wincing with every blow. It's 'cause of Bernadette, isn't it? Letitia said. She don't want you to go. Daddy was not the slapping sort, but Letitia realized from the stewing cloud that crossed her father's eyes that he had probably come as close as ever to slapping her in the mouth. She had learned long ago that the truth made people angry, and to speak of it was considered evil. If she hadn't been so upset about brother, she would have known better. Letitia's room was directly across the hall from Daddy's, and even when their door was closed, she knew what went on in there when she wasn't trying. She knew how Bernadette expected Daddy to account for his whereabouts every minute of the day. She knew how Bernadette told him no when he was thinking about buying more land or expanding his store because she preferred him to buy pretty things for the house. And worst of all, Letitia knew how Daddy had to beg, how he had to make his voice sound silly and ask a dozen times or more, each time sounding sillier than before, just to convince Bernadette to lie in his bed with him like a man lies with his wife. Most times, begging or no begging, her answer was no. Letitia did not know much about the private things men and women did together, but she knew that the sound of her father's begging made her feel sick to her stomach. If Daddy understood how much she really knew, he would have slapped her for sure. Letitia, Daddy said, a low thunder still roiling in his voice. Don't you dare put that magic eye on me, gal. You best learn how to stay out of grown people's business. I've made my decision, and that's the last I have to say about it. You're so weak, Daddy, Letitia thought. You look big and strong, but you're weak through and through. And she began to cry. Daddy left her to sort out her tears for herself instead of kissing them from her cheeks the way he usually did. Letitia cried late into the night, stroking her cat, wondering how the whole world could have gone so wrong in so little time. The next day, as she always did when she had nowhere else to turn, Letitia walked the half-mile's distance on an unpaved road to see Mama. Whenever Letitia went to Mama and cried about how mean Bernadette was to her, she knew how to fix it. She knew which powders, which doll, and which combination of roots, bone, and blood would make Bernadette more humble, more tolerable, more kind. Bernadette never got completely quiet, something Letitia had often wished for. But after a good ritual or two, Letitia noticed she had 2 or 3 weeks in a row when Bernadette did not say a single unkind thing to her. That was all the proof she needed that Mama's magic worked. After she heard the story, Mama clucked her tongue in the space where she'd lost 3 of her front teeth in a riding accident when she was a very young woman. The work of a curse, people said. Everyone considered the lost teeth a great tragedy since Mama would be very pretty otherwise. But Letitia knew that Daddy must not have minded. Maybe he hadn't loved Mama because she had no teeth, but he thought she was pretty enough to court. That man, Mama sighed. Well, don't nothing change. Always too scared of what people think. It was rare that Mama had anything bad. It was rare that Mama said anything bad about Daddy in her presence. I think it's 'cause of Bernadette. Well, shoot, we know that, Mama said. What ain't the fault of that devil woman? Do a spell, Mama. Make it so Bernadette will say Daddy can go save brother. Make her go out her head or get her real sick. Or kill her. That was what Letitia really wanted to say. Once, Mama had made a little rag doll of Bernadette when she was being more unpleasant than ever. Letitia's fingers had itched to tear that doll's tiny head clean off. Instead, Mama had given the doll's leg a good twist, and Bernadette had been laid up in bed for 2 weeks because she hurt her knee after falling in near Daddy's tomato patch ditch. But this time, instead of consulting her doll or her large leather pouch where she kept her vials of powders or gathering herbs from the woods alongside the doorway, Mama sighed and shook her head. Can't, Letitia. We hexed that woman 5, 6 times. I told you that kind of magic comes back on you. She got protection, and she coming back strong now. No, child, we mess with any bad juju now, your brother's gonna die. Brother's gonna die. Meeting Letitia's ears, those 3 words turned her blood cold. Tears appeared in her eyes but froze there. Her entire world felt frozen. The spirit's playing tricks, Mama said, running her hand across her tightly braided hair. Her bracelets of shells and cheap metals tinkled together. Somebody's got a curse on that house, and we got to do a higher ceremony. I think it's got to be you because you're blood kin to your brother. You need a sacrifice ritual, Letty. You seen me bleed chickens, and that's what you got to do. But if you want the message to get across, don't use a chicken. That might not get what you want quick enough. Use your black cat. Letitia had been filled with horror since her mama said the word sacrifice, because no matter how important the cause, she hated to see animals killed. For that reason and that reason alone, Letitia considered it a lucky thing she moved away from Mama's house, because people came for favors and Mama routinely slaughtered chickens, goats, and pigs for rituals or for meals, or usually for both. Letitia had been mortified enough at the idea of killing her first chicken, but nothing compared to her horror of hearing her mama mention her cat. Although Letitia didn't speak, Mama saw it in her eyes. Letty, I know you love that cat, but you'll make the spirits listen if you bleed something you love. You see how I keep my bleeding chickens apart from my stewing chickens? I treat them special. And I had to do this too when I was your age. I won't, Letitia said. Then you don't want to save your brother then, do you? Letitia's stomach hurt as she thought of her brother's row of smiling teeth. Brother was in a cage somewhere, and soon he would go to the chair. Daddy will go see about him, Letitia said. Child, your daddy ain't going nowhere. I know your daddy. I know him. If he was going to go, he'd have gone from the start. He'd have been there and back. Nothing can't keep that man from something he want to do, and nothing can't change his mind neither. Bernadette's got him stuck being wrong-headed to let his own boy die. There's ways for women to get a hold of men until they can't fight, and that's how Bernadette's got him. And she was way too strong for me, child. Else you and me both would be living in your daddy's fine house, wouldn't we? That was true, too. Letitia had always known it, but it hurt to hear Mama say it. The idea that Bernadette was more powerful than Mama terrified her. But of course she was. By now, Letitia's tears had freed themselves, glistening across her face. She hitched back a sob. This is one of them times you got a choice, Letitia. You can do what you want and hope things don't turn out wrong, or you can do what you know will make things right. Letitia's next sob escaped her throat fully formed. She suddenly wished that her parents had never met for the secret Sunday afternoon meetings Mama had told her about, because then she would have never been born. If you don't go and do it, if you go and do it clean and quick, like you seen me. When the blood splits, say this prayer. Spirit, release my daddy and give him strength to fight the curse. And do it at midnight. See how you name that cat? Like you known it from the start. Mama will bring you a new cat someday. That was a lie too in its own way. Mama could not afford to bring her hardly anything. By myself? Letitia heard herself ask. Just take the cat out back to your daddy's barn. Do it quick. With that, she handed Letitia a slender, shiny knife from the pocket of her stained old apron, just the right size for midnight. Letitia did not remember her walk home, nor did she remember most of the day. She told Bernadette she didn't feel well, which wasn't the least bit untrue, and she sat on her bed, stroking Midnight's velvet soft fur, rubbing her chin against the top of his head, while his purr's roar seemed to fill her ears. As much as she hated to believe Mama's words, she knew their truth. Daddy had made up his mind, and he would not go see Brother on his own, and Brother most certainly would die without Daddy's help. If there was a curse on her house, like Mama had said, then the curse on the town where Brother was in jail was 100 times bigger, 100 times stronger. It was a curse that had touched many families already. And the trial day would ruin everything, Letitia knew. If Brother went to the chair, Daddy would be a changed man. The bourbon bottle he kept hidden in the pantry for special occasions would become his constant companion. Bernadette, full of her own guilt, would be more hateful than ever, and Letitia would grow to despise them both. For all her life, she would judge men as weak and act accordingly, learning from the lesson of Daddy and Bernadette. She might hate them, but she would imitate them all the same. She knew these things as sure as she knew her name. Letitia felt her future unfolding like a clear-minded dream. It was so imminent, poised with terrible ease, that she marveled that Daddy and Bernadette couldn't see it too. But they couldn't. If they could, Daddy would have left for the trial by now. Midnight's green eyes shined up at her like two perfect marbles, and he mewed at her. In Sunday school, Letitia had studied Judas Iscariot, the betrayer, and the thought made her cry harder. Midnight wasn't the same as Jesus, of course, but he trusted her. For the past year, since Daddy said she could keep the cat who planted himself on their doorstep, she had taken care of Midnight, and he had taken care of her. How could she kill a creature that loved her? But then, Letitia remembered Abraham and Isaac from the Old Testament. God told Abraham to sacrifice his son, which she had thought was very mean of God when she'd heard the story, to tell the truth. But in the end, it was only a test. Just like Abraham, she only had to show her willingness to do what Mama said, and God would provide another way to save Brother. Or maybe this was the only way. And she and Midnight were making a sacrifice like Jesus had to save another soul. By sunset, Letitia made up her mind with a deep, ragged breath. She would do it. Just before midnight, she would take the cat to the barn. She would bring Daddy's catalog-ordered gold pocket watch, which he kept on his desk at night, and as soon as the tall hand and the short hand pointed to midnight, just like Mama said, she would. I have to do it midnight, Letitia whispered to her cat, who was curled up in her lap with none of Jesus's inkling at the Last Supper that his sacrifice was waiting. Maybe God will save you. But even if he doesn't, you can save brother. I know you can. And it seemed to Letitia miraculously that the cat mewed a tiny yes, the way a cat would say yes if it could speak, as if Midnight understood it all, and it was all perfectly fine with him. Midnight was happy to be in the barn because Letitia had brought out a dish of milk first. He found the dish and crouched comfortably beside it, lapping it up. She watched him drink, enjoying the slurping sound he made and the sloppy droplets of milk dotting his whiskers. Midnight was 2 parts cat and 1 part hog, Daddy always said. That thought made her smile through their tears. Then she felt her resolve melting. Watching Midnight, she felt frozen with disbelief at the very thought of what she planned to do, and she wanted nothing more than to scoop Midnight into her arms and run back to bed before she got caught outside the house. Then she remembered that wonderful sound of Daddy and brother laughing on the porch, how that sound had lulled her to sleep, how he called her Letty, how he hugged her and said he loved her every time he came to stay, never tugging on her hair or teasing the way her friends' older brothers did. Only 2 minutes until midnight. How had the time gone so fast? Quickly, watching Midnight drink his milk, Letitia said a series of prayers. God, please let Midnight forgive me for what I'm about to do. And please, let this be just a test so you will stop my hand at the last moment. And please, don't let Midnight die. But if Midnight has to die, please let his sacrifice stop the curse so Daddy will go look after brother and keep him safe. Her prayer gobbled a full minute. With as heavy a heart as she had ever known, nearly choking off her breath so that her head felt light, Letitia realized it was time. Time to take out the shiny knife Mama had given her. Time to hold Midnight tight and feed his blood to the spirits. Midnight had once gotten himself covered in mud, and Bernadette had demanded that she fill up a tin tub and bathe him, or else he could not come into the house. So Letitia knew from experience that it was hard to hold Midnight still for something he didn't want to do. She knew to watch out for his claws, especially those powerful back claws, and she would have to hook her arm tightly around him. And she knew she would have to keep no space between her knees because he would back up against her as far as he could. Now, just like then, she told herself she would think of the task, not of Midnight himself, or else with all his thrashing and complaining, she might feel sorry and forget what was at stake. Daddy was weak, so she had to be strong, and that was that. Sure enough, Midnight put up a fight. Even if he didn't know what she was planning, he was angry to be pulled away from his milk, and he was wriggling from the start. Letitia was startled when she felt razor-thin stripes of pain across her forearm from Midnight's claws. And then she felt angry. The anger helped. She clamped her knees around him and hooked one arm around his middle tight. Despite the perspiration dampening her palm, she kept a firm grip on the knife and raised it to Midnight's throat. Mama always used the throat. Letitia wanted to close her eyes, but she couldn't. She poked and then slashed with the knife quickly, and even though the cut wasn't nearly deep enough, she was amazed to see a ribbon of blood seep through Midnight's fur, right above his tiny collarbone. While Midnight screeched and renewed his escape attempt, Letitia watched, fascinated, as 2 fat crimson drops of blood fell to the dusty barn floor at her feet. She kept her grip around the cat until the very last second. She almost forgot the prayer, but then she began reciting it as well as she could remember. Spirit, please help lift the curse and make my daddy strong so he will go and see about What in the great red hell are you doing? It sounded like it might be God's voice at first, albeit not as kindly as she thought God might sound. But when she gathered her senses above her racing heart, Letitia realized it was only Daddy's voice. She looked up and saw him standing in the doorway of the barn, wearing only his trousers. She saw his chest heaving up and down with his breathing. His expression was a combination of rage and shock she had never seen on her father's face, and it seared her. The sight of him made her drop the knife, and Midnight scrambled from her arms, scratching her chest through the nightgown as he launched himself from her with his powerful hind legs. Letitia did not know if the blood on her gown was hers or Midnight's. "Letitia, what are you doing?" Daddy said. Mama said, she said, but Letitia couldn't finish because she felt too overcome. Abraham and Isaac, she remembered. God had stepped in and sent Daddy. Daddy fumbled for his belt, but before he realized he wasn't wearing it, his sleep-wrinkled face was growing more alert, more angry. He wanted to beat her, she saw. He wanted to beat her in a way he had never beaten her before. Mama said if I sacrificed Midnight, I'd break the curse, and you would go see about brother, Letitia said, finally finding the words. She pointed to the droplets of blood that splattered the floor. See, Daddy, I had to bleed Midnight, but I did it for brother, Daddy. I did it so you'd go to the trial. Daddy stared at her pointing finger, then back at her face, then back at her finger, and his own face seemed to transform. The only light was the dim lantern she'd brought with the bowl of milk, but Daddy's face wasn't the same anymore. The only word for it, really, was haunted. He cradled his abdomen as if a grown man had kicked him in the stomach hard. We have to save brother, Daddy, Letitia said, a whisper. Daddy rocked in place like he did when he'd had too much to drink. Then he took a lurching step until he was no longer facing her. One step at a time, he walked away. He did not look at her or speak to her. She saw him climb the steps of the back porch, and he was back inside the house. He left the back door wide open. Bernadette wouldn't like that, Letitia thought. All the mosquitoes could come in. For a long time, Letitia called for Midnight outside. She finally heard him growling somewhere out in the bushes near the cotton patch, but he would not come to her. Maybe he would never come back, she realized. But this time she did not cry. Letitia quietly washed her bloody scratches clean in the kitchen sink, blew out the lamp, and climbed the stairs to go into her room. Daddy's door was closed, but she could hear Bernadette's voice through the door, wide awake. Richard, what's into you? I said talk to me, goddammit. You put that suitcase down, you hear me? Do you know what time it is? Quickly, Letitia stole into her own room and shut the door. She suddenly needed to tear off every piece of clothing she was wearing, even though her body was shaking. She climbed into her bed under her covers, seeking sanctuary while her breathing came hard and deep from her lungs. She had a headache. The memory of Midnight's blood on the knife made her stomach twist, and she was afraid she would be sick. She had left Daddy's pocket watch lying on the barn floor, she remembered, and Bernadette's bowl from the kitchen. They would be mad about that, she thought. She thought it best she'd get out of bed and go fetch them, but she couldn't move from where she lay. Letitia heard the door to Daddy's room open up across the hall, followed by his heavy footsteps. She couldn't see him, of course, but somehow she knew he was wearing his best brown suit and white shirt with his brown Sunday derby. He was wearing the clothes that told everyone that he was Richard Reeves, a business owner, and he was not a hard luck sort of man. Bernadette had given up shouting, but now she was outright begging instead, the way she liked to hear Daddy beg. Richard, you aren't thinking clearly. Do you know what they'll do to an uppity yellow nigger who thinks he can just walk in there and have a say? Think of it, Richard. Don't be a fool. Don't get your name mixed up in this mess. That boy's going to be all right. You aren't thinking. What about your family? What about me and Letitia? I swear to Jesus, if you don't stop this foolishness, I won't be here when you come back. Bernadette's voice trailed the heavy footsteps down the stairs. Through the open window, Letitia heard the front door open, and the sound of Bernadette's voice in the night, suddenly shrieking like a woman in pain. Richard, don't do this. I love you. But Bernadette's professed love to Letitia Just sounded like the same old hatefulness. No matter though. She had bled midnight and the curse was broken. Daddy's ears belonged to himself again, and he had his strength back. Letitia heard the engine to Dad's choke and sputter, then roar to life. Letitia closed her eyes, smiling. The sound of that purring engine as it drove away was as sweet as the memory of Daddy's laughter with Brother on the porch that night, as sweet as Christmas morning and as gentle as the stinging of Mama's loving hands when she pulled her hair into tight plaits between her knees, the way Mama only really knew how. For once, Letitia's third eye, what Daddy called her magic eye, wasn't working. Brother's future was blurry and far away, not for her to know. All she knew for sure was that Richard Reeves was on his way to the trial in his good suit to try and save Brother, and that knowledge would last her as long as she would live. There's a little bit of an after note here at the end of the story, but and thus endeth the story. After note. Nalo Hopkinson invited me to submit a short story to her anthology Mojo, Conjure Stories. I wanted to fix a broken piece in my family history. My grandmother, the late Lottie Powell Sears Houston, clearly remembered her half-brother being on trial for his life, and her father was too intimidated to testify on his behalf, which she considered cowardly for the rest of her life, though I can only imagine the institutional racism standing in his way. Her brother died on death row. Did Brother die in this story? Maybe, maybe not. But at least Letty gave her father strength enough to try. And thus endeth the afternote. This has been Trial Day by Tananarive Due. You can find this story in the collection Ghost Summer Stories. This is a wonderful little collection. There are several stories, and they are somewhat interconnected. There were a lot of really, really powerful lines throughout this story. I have to admit, I was quite moved by a lot of it. Though I think the potency of the letter from the NAACP lawyer was for me perhaps the most gripping. Certain little kernels and nuggets and understandings of truth from Letty's mom and her exposition on that whole situation. Excuse me. So sorry about that. I'm going to ask for our mod to give me an indicator of what time it is. And for those of you all who enjoyed this story or who enjoyed Tananarive Due in general, and who would like to pick up this collection, you can find ghost stories at our good friends over at Harriet's. The link here is on Facebook. So if you're watching us on Facebook, you can go ahead and just click the link right there. Otherwise, you can follow the link or just go to bookshop.org and search Harriet's and look for Ghost Stories by Tananarive Due. I'm sorry, not Ghost Stories, Ghost Summer Stories by Tananarive Due. All right, let's go back and see what some of you all thought. I'm going to go ahead and clear this one off. Boop. Let's see. Da, 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 da. Let's see. Okay, I'm looking at the invitations and y'all sort of little crosstalk, which is cool. So Marie says she may be young, but that doesn't mean she's wrong. That man may be a lawyer, but that's his son. Okay, so we are up at the point where Letty has read the letter and is admonishing her father for it. Olive and Boo says, I can't imagine not wanting to do what I could for my child because of respectability, right? I think that the way that he, and yes, and because it wasn't really just the respectability. The respectability was the external excuse for it. but I think it's proven or made much clearer a little bit later in the story that it really has more to do with the seemingly supernatural hold that Bernadette has on you know what, I forgot his name that quick, and they made such a point of saying it. What is this man's name? Let me go back here and find it. And that's the wrong story. That ain't it either. Hold up, I lost my spot. But anyway, trial day 187. So it wasn't just the respectability, it was Bernadette's hold on Richard. I don't know why I had to flip through all those pages just to get to Richard. But clearly, um clearly she had like I said, an almost supernatural grip on him, which was unusual because she didn't occur for me as any kind of a practitioner or a conjurer. I think Issa's responding to that moment when Letty sees her father as truly weak. Um, Issa also pulls out this line. She had learned long ago that the truth made people angry, that it was considered evil to speak of it. I'm recognizing all the heartbreak here as being associated with that disappointment of a daughter recognizing that her father is failing to step up and be the full measure of a man that that he should be. Um, okay, that's Ashanti. What's happening, Ashanti? Good to see you. I'm looking at the sad face, and I'm guessing again that that's about the disappointment and the heartbreak of Letty and that moment with her father. Let's see. Daddy was weak, and she had to be strong, and that was that. These are, and indeed, that is a really rough task for a child. Do we think? I'm just curious. I think I know the answer, but do we think that Letty acted outside of her station? She wanted to save her brother, but the the her father had made up his mind. Her mother says that it's not really his mind that's made up, that he's under the influence of someone else, and acting on that counsel, Letty makes the choice to, in fact, through spiritual supernatural manipulation, she makes the choice to, in fact, force her father to do what she believes is the right thing. Now, while we accept that respectability is not the sum total of the reason, that Richard brought up some, I think, fair points about the potential consequences. It isn't just that, one, we don't really know if brother did or did not get into at least some grim, heinous crime, knowing that, being a black man of that time in that station, that death was the likely consequence of their crime. So there is, at least, in the lawyer's words, which we are presuming to be, the representation of truth, there's a good possibility, though they maintain their innocence, there's a good possibility that it did happen too. We just don't know. We do know that that is a Klan run county, and that they, being people, black people of means, also live in a Klan infested county. There is the possibility of some uh, very real recompense, very real consequences. Um, not just professionally, not just his name and reputation in business, but when he speaks of making life hard for them or several people, that's not just, making a mockery of him. We're talking about potential grave consequences, right? So just, I think it's, is I'm just posing the question. I'm not sure that I have an opinion about it, but I think she took a really, really big step, a really, really big step. She had a wisdom in her understanding and her choice. Did Richard have a wisdom in his, or do we think that he was just purely soaked in the manipulation of Bernadette and the esteem of his own position? Jack, under the name Lock Dreamer, says, amazing how children take ownership for things that don't belong to them nor are in their control. Erica Yolita, and I think that kind of speaks to the question that I'm asking. I'm relieved and saddened at the same time that the cat was saved. Do we think the cat was saved? I don't know. I mean, she pierced the cat's throat and slit it, and while it wasn't described as a particularly there wasn't a lot of effluvium, that is still a mortal wound. It might have just taken the cat some time. I don't know. What do we think? Do we think the cat made it? I think from a literary standpoint, as a tool of writing, it was the best possible way to handle that. I don't know if we could have forgiven her if she her Letty, or even her Tananarive Due, if she had out and out had the cat killed, on camera, as it were, for us to see the cat's full death, especially after doing the work of making us kind of love the cat too. I don't know if it would be as easy to forgive. I think kind of having the cat jump off and run away, and even do so vigorously, gives us wiggle room to hope. But it also does a wonderful job as a literary device of paying off that sort of hope against hope that the sort of ram in the bush scenario would play out, right? Like we can choose to believe that was salvation. But at the same time, what she wanted was accomplished, and that required the sacrifice. So what was the sacrifice? Was the sacrifice life, or was the sacrifice the relationship with Midnight? Judy Lee wants Daddy to be strong and wants the cat to live. I think that's kind of what everybody wanted. But a sacrifice was required, apparently. Melanin is not happy about Richard wanting to beat that baby in that barn. I can't imagine what Richard was feeling and experiencing, and point of fact, what even brought him out to the barn at that hour. Was it Midnight's yowling and screeching? Why would he care? Cats do that. Kind of an interesting thought there. She made him strong. Now there seems to be a by ho. I don't know why we have by ho here. Was that it, Bernadette? Because Bernadette ain't going nowhere. She's still in that house. The whole book is excellent. So that is a recommendation and a referral from our friend Latricia Ransom. If you are interested in Ghost Summer, the whole book, not just this story, is excellent. Let's see. Judy says that cats cut each other that bad just showing love. So you're saying that the wound that Midnight suffered is nothing. That cat, that's just a love tap to the cats. Listen, I had a cat for a good long chunk of my life, and I've never seen anything like that. But I don't know. Issa says, with regard to the question, no, how can she stay in a child's place? I don't know. I'm not saying that necessarily she could. I'm saying that there's a lot there. There's a whole other story that we'll never read unless it's in this book, as to what the consequences might have been for Richard's choice, as to whether or not it had the impact. Again, we're kind of taking the lawyer and Mama's words as the truth, as the foundational truth, that Richard's actions would save brother, and that Richard was operating under the powerful curse that Bernadette had kind of put on the house. And so those things being true, that's the move. We still don't know, though, what the consequence of that might be in terms of life lost in other directions. Does Richard even make it home? I don't know. Emo says, what if she actually killed the cat? Perhaps there would have been more required in the process of performing the sacrifice. What if she actually killed the cat? I don't know. I'm confused about I'm not confused. I think it was intentionally ambiguous. I think as a literary device, it was absolutely the best way to handle that, though, was to leave it somewhat ambiguous. And then we see Marilyn Monroe saying, yes, bye ho, was Richard breaking out of that spell Bernadette had on him and driving away despite her protests. Driving off into the sunset to commit a very heroic action, and we hope against hope that Brother's life is spared. How do we feel about Brother? He is not so much a character as he is an idea. I think there's a reason that he's sort of painted as this sort of good and altruistic. Now, again, in the eyes of a 9-year-old, this kid is best thing since sliced bread, which, based on the time period that the story took place, was a brand new invention. He's the bee's knees. He's everything in her eyes. And he could bring the laughter, which I think was a really powerful way of summing up the idea of this character without giving him too much description. What we know of him is that he brings laughter where he goes. When I read that part, I was reminded of one of the stories that we read last week. Not Our Bit of Harlem. It wasn't Drenched in Light, I don't think. The story, y'all know the one I'm talking about. Keep Your Wife Clean. The male figure in that story seemed to bring the laughter wherever he went too. And it was kind of, that was the hallmark that we had to believe that, regardless of whatever else there was about him, his slick tongue and his sort of wayward way of being, the fact that he brought laughter with him was sort of our mark that he was a good guy. In fact, it was what led to his success. His greatest successes came because he kept the spirits of other people high while he was doing his job and while they were doing theirs. And there was something to be said for the one who brings the laughter. So I think that's sort of an interesting way to define a character without giving us a whole lot of them. Do we look at the people? I think even in stories where there's a very clear-cut black and white, even when the villains bring laughter with them, we empathize with them more. The Joker will always be a more empathetic villain than Bane. Bane might, for a lot of people, Bane might have the right idea, but people connect with the Joker. And I think part of that reason is if you can make them laugh, if you can make somebody laugh, you can get them on your team for almost anything. Charisma is a hell of a drug. Anyway, y'all, I see the comments have kind of died down, so I don't know. Maybe y'all are... The comments died down until this one. Apparently Joker is bae. Who knew? Anyway, y'all, it looks like the comments have kind of died down. I'm not entirely certain what time it is, but my clock feels like it's about time to wrap up, and I don't have a second story prepared. This has been episode 98. We almost done, y'all. Tuesday will be 99. Thursday will be 100. And then Storytime with Julian goes on a bit of hiatus and comes back renewed under a different shape and a different form. But for now, let's just go ahead and love on. Yeah, my internal clock was saying it's about 15 after, so it's about 13 after 11. So let's just go ahead and close out this episode. Thank you so much for coming out and being a part of this thing that we do. I love you. I appreciate the support. Judy Lee, thank you so much. I love reading to y'all. And make sure that you do this in support of the show. We need ratings on our Facebook page. We need you to follow and like. We need you to share. We need you to drum up and make some noise so that people know that this thing is happening. Now, granted, it's kind of hard when it's like, hey, come do this thing for the last 2 weeks and then we don't know what's going to happen. But trust, it's going to come back. And when we come back, I want to come back to a full house. I want all of y'all to, the back episodes will be up. Go ahead and promote and promote and promote. And I'll be doing the same, trust and believe. But you can always support us on Instagram. You'll find us at Storytime Julian. On Twitter, we're Storytime Julian. We're even Storytime Julian on Twitch, I believe. And if you want to follow me on Twitter every once in a while, I get a bug up my ass and decide that I want to talk on Twitter. You can find me at Magnet for Awesome. If you want to continue to support the show and keep things growing and moving and developing, you can always tip your griot at Cash App. That's hashtag Storytime Julian. Thank you so much for all the wonderful comments and for all the thanks. I appreciate it. It's what I love to do. I love seeing y'all, and I look forward to seeing y'all next week on Tuesday for episode 99. Until then, I have been and continue to be Julian Long, and this is Storytime with Julian, and we'll catch you next week. Peace.